Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to another live stream. This is day 2 for me of the London to Brighton charity ride, the OTR event organised by my friend James Ogilvie. And this is the last of the 6 rides for the weekend. So I'm hoping a few more riders turn up. There's still time yet, but it's only 8 riders on the line at the moment. Now, of course, I'm not riding. I explained yesterday I'm still recovering from a really serious bout of flu, and I'm still gunked up. So if I struggle to get my words out and with my breathing, I'd apologise already. But I'm going to try and cover the whole of the race. It's 85 kilometres. Now, yesterday we finished in about 2 hours and 38 minutes, I think. So expect around the same today, unless somebody wants to push off the front. But they weren't hanging about yesterday. It's nice to see Steve Noble is on the line in the 3R kit alongside me. So I expect Steve to do well on, especially on the hills. He's a climber. So he's going to be up there at the front, I think, during this ride. And we'll see who stays with him. Like I say, I hope there's a few minutes to go. And we got a few late joiners as well yesterday. So there may be a few late joiners joining in. We'll see what happens. But I haven't ridden now for quite some time. This flu has really knocked me back. And as I say, I still don't feel very well. So this will be just a chat, and I'll jump on the bike, try not to get kicked out of the event every 30 minutes and see how we go. But yeah, stick my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. And we've had another rider joining. This is not a race, but yesterday, I think if you watch the feed, you will realise that many of the riders treat it as a race. It's like an unofficial event where there's huge kudos for being the first finisher over the line, and that was certainly the case in yesterday's ride. So we'll see what happens, but I expect there to be some competition amongst the riders. And we've had another rider join in with the Team 3R kit. Now, who's that? It's not showing on the list at the moment, but no doubt when we kick off, we'll be able to find out who that rider is. Now, the way it works is you have to, as a commentator, you have to spin the pedals every 30 minutes because you're only allowed to follow riders for 30 minutes at a time. So I have to keep remembering to jump on the bike and just turn the pedals every 30 minutes or every 28 minutes, as it will be tonight, I think, 27, 28. So I'll start off by setting an alarm for the first one, but I generally forget. I'll be honest. I'm not the best at doing this because I've got other things going off, and I get caught up in the commentary as well, especially when it's exciting. I can completely forget that I need to get back on the bike, even with an alarm going off. Sometimes I just get so caught up, I turn the alarm off and forget to get back on the bike. Anyway, we'll jump on now. Nice to see another rider turning up. So we'll jump on, we'll turn the pedals, get over the line, along with, I hope, the rider sitting there. Come on. And there we go, you see. So I've already spotted a problem. Let me see if we can fix this. There we go. Am I, yeah, I'm being moved to the edge, but we'll try again. There we go. We're off. Okay, so I can now join the ride. There's always a few glitches, but let's find out who's up the road and who's come on. Why is it not updating? Okay, so well, I know we're live because it's showing live, so why is it not working? Okay, bear with me folks, I'll get this working in a minute. Let's find out what's going on. There we go. That should work now. Yep, there we go. So let's find out who's up the road and who the other 3R rider is. Oh, it's Evan Oystenson. So he's joined the ride. So he's going to be certainly one of the main competitors for this ride. I can say that without any doubt, because he's a very competitive rider. And but where's Steve? Can't see him. Has he gone up the road? No, this is the front of the group. So let's work his way back and see what's happening behind. There's Evan. Where's Steve gone? There's Maruri. Now he rode yesterday. Gomez and Doug. And the rider that was alongside me, Strojek, he's off the line. And there's Steve. Now Steve's obviously had some issue, but is he going to take it easy, or is he going to make an effort and join the riders ahead? We'll have to wait and see. It's too early yet to say, but we've got Kessel as well. I hope he wasn't waiting for me thinking I'm riding the ride, because obviously I'm not in any fit state to get back on the bike yet. Just that short period trying to turn the pedals got me out of breath, so let's see what happens. So we'll keep an eye on Steve, but we'll get back to the front. That's Strojek. He's setting a nice pace, and yeah, high wattage as well. So he's not hanging about. He's trying to catch up, and he's going to do so with this front group. You can see he's above his numbers are red, so he's above his threshold, just trying to pull back this front group. But we're basically all together. Now, what happened yesterday was it wasn't until we got to the first section of the climb, and even then it wasn't until we got to the second part, this orange bit here, before we started to see any disintegration of the front group, and even then it was only minor. So I expect pretty much the same during this ride, that this group of 6 riders will probably stay together, and hopefully they'll be joined by Strojek. He's only 40 meters behind them, so he's going to rejoin them. Especially look at the wattage he's putting out. The problem is he's going to need to catch them and then get some recovery, because this isn't easy. Working above threshold for even a few minutes like this takes a lot out of you. But to be fair to the lad, he's got there. And he looks like a strong rider anyway, so he's got there. Now he needs to sit in and just get some recovery. Now these two, they're 330 meters behind. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens here, but they look like they are dropping off even more, because the watt kilos they're putting out, I don't think is sufficient, and certainly Doug's drafting, so that's why his is so low. But Gomez isn't putting out, and neither is Doug, putting out enough wattage to make a big difference here and catch the group ahead. So they're going to fall further behind. I explained all that yesterday. But you've got Steve Noble coming up. Now, Steve could well end up pushing these two along. And the three of them, if they work together, there's no reason why they can't close the 370-metre gap to the group in front. I think certainly Steve's going to try and do that. He's too competitive. Yeah, there he goes, look. He's not waiting around for the other two. He's basically going past them and saying, come on, either work with me or I ride on my own. And it looks like he's going to have to ride on his own because they don't look to be putting in an effort to join him. So Steve's going to basically try and pace up to the riders in front. Now maybe the two behind him will put in a bit of an effort and join him, but at the moment they're not doing so. The gap is growing slowly, but it is growing. And then we've got Kessel. Now he's already above threshold at 2.6. So let's zoom in. Is that? Yeah, it's difficult to know, but my guess is he's one of the lighter riders, and that's why he's going into threshold. Okay. 80 metres behind, we've got Monisser. And Taylor's another 55 metres behind. And then we're back to the front group. So 7 riders now. And these 7 riders, let's see what the gap is to the next rider on the road behind them. The next rider on the road, obviously, is Steve, and he's 400 metres. So it's a really tough ask to close that gap as a solo rider. You know, you've got 7 riders riding as a group, swapping leads, and Steve's basically putting out a decent effort, but he's going to struggle to bring that gap down. And his best chance of doing so, I mean, I do think he will stay in touch, and his best chance of pulling back that gap is when we hit the climb, because Steve is a pure climber and a very good one. So I have no doubt that he'll pull back some of this deficit as soon as we hit the climb. And hopefully what his aim is now, and I can say this in all confidence, his aim is to peg the gap. He's not bothered about closing it as long as it doesn't grow out of hand. So it's 390 at the moment, and providing he can peg it at that, i.e. match the pace of the group in front. And you can see that the riders in front are doing much less watt kilos than he is, which is what I mean about he has to work much harder to match the pace of a group in front as a solo rider. And that's why it's so difficult. And that's another one of the reasons why later on in the commentary, as I did yesterday, you'll probably hear me saying, you know, I can't understand why a rider is riding solo off the front of a group. Because unless you know you're going to be able to make a break, there's no sense in doing so. And particularly if I'll get my words out. If you're in the middle of the pack and you're riding with a group, and then all of a sudden you decide, okay, I need to push it along and ride on your own off the front. Sometimes it's not worthwhile doing so, because you're not going to close a big gap anytime soon on your own as a solo rider. I mean, obviously you have to make an effort to gain places, but there's a time and a place for making efforts, and sometimes allowing riders to join you and then working together can be the tactic to use. But then you've got to rely on those riders being prepared to work. Let's see what's happening behind Steve anyway. Let's zoom out a little bit and see if we can catch other riders on the road. So these two were together earlier, and it looks like that's what they've decided to do. They've decided to ride together. but they're not really putting in any kind of an effort to catch Steve in front. Kessel's joined them now. Now the question will be, will Kessel, he's taking a bit of recovery here, but will then Kessel push on, or will he ride with these two? And it all depends whether the pace these two are doing suits him or not. He could decide that they're not going fast enough and decide, okay, they're not working as hard as I want to work, and off I go on my own. But that's what I mean about sometimes it can be counterproductive, because he could end up riding off the front of these two, but not making any progress whatsoever on the group in front, or the rider in front, in this case Steve. And that's where you've got to weigh up, folks. That's how it works. This is not a race, but these riders are obviously riding for best times. Some of them will just be happy to finish, certainly if they're going to do the full 85 kilometres. But other riders certainly, let's go back to the front, like Evan here, he's not just going for the best time, but he's actually going for, being the first finisher, because there's a lot of kudos for doing that. And the riders have great respect for each other as well, generally. So it'll be interesting. Now let's see what's happening behind these two. So there you go, look, you can see on the road that I don't expect, this happened yesterday, we had a couple of riders pushing off the front, but they didn't get anywhere because the group behind worked together and closed the gaps until we hit like the climb. So I suspect the same thing is going to happen this time as well. These 7 riders are not going to splinter until we get to the main climbs. What I will add a caveat to that statement. The only time when you see a group like this, when you see somebody drop off the back, if he doesn't close the gap quick enough, then the 6 riders in front of him can very quickly get out of hand and get away, and you won't close the gap. You have to be really aware and really on your mettle to make sure that if you're hanging off the back, you don't allow, like a 20-meter gap would probably be the most you want to allow, because even that 20 meters means you're going to be burning matches to close up. And if you're doing it on 2 or 3 times, it happened yesterday. I called him Mr. Pink, I couldn't pronounce his name, but we saw a rider who I christened Mr. Pink yesterday, constantly burning matches, constantly falling off the back, closing the gap, falling off the back, closing the gap. And towards the end of the ride, he ended up being dropped and couldn't stay with the leaders. And he went from being at the front in the first group to, I think he finished 5th in the end. So you can see that Evan's doing his usual thing of pushing this group along at 3 watt kilos. So they've got to push the pace up to join him. Now, I noticed that Aquila was the rider that dropped off the back earlier. He's dropped off the back here, and this is a perfect example of what I was saying. He has not got to allow himself to get distanced off the back, even by 10 meters like he was there, because the more times he has to do this, the more times he has to close that gap. And he's doing the right thing here by pushing on. So perhaps he's listening to me, I don't know. But he is doing the right thing by making sure that he's up near the front or even at the front. Because if you're constantly yo-yoing off the back, you're working much, much harder than what he will be up the front, which is where he is at the moment. You can learn a lot, folks, from James Ogilvie ran a series on drafting techniques and on racecraft, which I live streamed and followed. And I'm a very experienced cyclist in terms of racecraft and this lot, because I've been doing it for so many years. But even I learned some things about the difference between real life cycling and virtual cycling. And I picked up a few tips, and I can pass those on now. But I think I've been doing this long enough to be able to sort of like call out the tactics and get it mostly right. Not all the time, obviously, but mostly I get it right in terms of calling out the tactics of the riders and what it is they're trying to achieve. And riders that took part in the training that James organised, the racecraft training, obviously will be putting that into effect because it really was a very good series. You can catch it on my YouTube channel if you want to check out some of the videos. Just have a look for racecraft training. OTR are one of the premier organisers of events on RGT at the moment, and I tend to work closely with them, especially when asked to do so. Like James asked me, would I cover an event this weekend, one of these events, and I told him I'd cover two. So I covered one yesterday at the same time, and I'm covering this one until they finish tonight. So, excuse me. Right. Anyway, let's see what's happening with Steve behind this group. So these 7 are going to stay together, I'm pretty sure, until we hit the climb, and then we'll find out who the climbers are. And there's Steve, and he's closed the gap, look, so not only has he pegged back the gap, but having said that, if you notice that it's not steep uphill, but it is slightly uphill, and that's where Steve comes into his own. So while ever the terrain is going uphill and it's now starting, it's not going to drop again now for a little while. Steve is going to close the gap, and he's putting out good wattage anyway. He's putting out 3.7, so yeah, he's putting out good wattage, but also he's very, very strong on the climbs. And as soon as we hit the climb, expect him to not just catch the group, but to actually be at the front with Evan. And I think you could see those two riders actually be the two that break away, maybe later in the race. It'll be interesting tonight to see whether riders decide to try and make a break early, or whether they look at the profile and think, well, I know for a fact I'm going to have the advantage when we get to, I'll show you on the map, this last steep section here, where it goes up to 12% and over. So it's 12% here for quite a few kilometres. Well, not 12%, it's steep, and then it goes to 12% here. And a rider like Steve Noble can look at that and think, yeah, okay, that's where I'm going to shine. I don't have to worry about this section in between, providing, I can just stay with the group, and he can drop the group on this section here. So it'd be interesting to see whether he decides to do that along with Evan. I mean, Evan can do the same. He can decide, he can look at this section and think, yeah, I don't have a problem. I can win the race. Well, it's not a race, but I'm going to call it a race tonight. And there he is. There's Evan. So these two riders are going to ride together, I feel. I mean, did Evan wait for him? I think he did, I think Evan deliberately dropped. There you go, Evans. They might even be listening to me. If you're listening, guys, give me another wave. So many of the riders do actually follow my stream live as they're riding, and certainly my teammates do sometimes. So let's go to the front. Now Cartmiller's jumped off the front, but only by a few meters. But you can actually see the two riders, Evan and Steve, have got them in sight. They're about 100 meters behind. So it's all going to come together as we hit the climbs. And then I think it's going to fracture, maybe not on the first orange bit, but certainly by the time we get to this section here. Now, is the paddles working? Let's see, the paddles. Yeah, I tend to think, yeah, it's working. We had a drop yesterday with this, what I call the paddle is this white white paddle here shows where the leader is on the road. Sorry, not the leader, where the current highlighted rider is on the road. So we've got 5 riders up the front, and then Steve and Evan have now joined them along with another rider. So we're all together. Let's zoom out and see if we can count this group, because this is where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we've got 9 riders here. Yeah, Steve had a glitch at the start. I wondered why he was behind, but you know, he's the type of rider where, to be fair, I bet he wasn't panicking at all. I bet he was just thinking, yeah, not an issue. I'll just put in a burst and we'll get there. He's that kind of rider. I watched him enough now to know he wouldn't have panicked. Excuse me, I'm really gunked up, folks, so you'll have to excuse me when I'm trying to clear my throat. 8 riders, sorry, not. Have we got one off the front? Let's just go. No, we haven't. So we've got 8 riders in the front group, and we'll drop back and see what's happening behind them. We've got Kessel and Manasseh. Now they're almost a kilometre behind, so they could well pull back some of that distance on the climbs if they're climbers. If they're not, then they're going to fall even further behind. So we'll see what happens. They are putting in, I mean, Kessel is working above his threshold. Manasseh is doing 3.2. So they are working. They're not just sitting back and letting the gap grow. They are working to try and keep an eye on the gap. Doug has been dropped, and looking at his wattage, I think he's just cruising. So I think he's maybe doing the ride. If he decides to do the full ride, I think he's just pacing himself and decided to ride at his own pace rather than try and keep it somebody else's. I mean, Gomez will join him, and they could well end up riding together. I mean, if they ride together, they can catch the 2 in front, but they've got to put in a bit more work, because Manasseh and Kessel obviously are working pretty well together and pretty hard. And Taylor is now no longer Lantern Rouge. He was, but he's now being joined by a late joiner, Mr. Bishop. So I think it's a Mr. Bishop, is it? Let's just zoom in. Yep, Mr. Bishop. So late joiner. So we now have 15 riders online, including myself. Talking about which, I'm going to jump on the bike very shortly to make sure I don't get kicked from the event. Well, let's go back to the front. Now, Issy4 has already stated that he's only riding for about an hour. So he's going to probably work pretty hard off the front, which is a little bit disconcerting for the... I mean, look, he's doing 4 kilos, and he can afford to do so if he's only riding for an hour, which seems a little bit unfair to me, but he's going to be dropping out, so I don't think they'll pay too much mind to him. They'll probably keep him within distance, but I don't think they're going to worry too much if he does jump off the front. Let's... I am surprised, though, that they've splintered on that first bit of a climb. Steve's out of this group. I would say that let's go back to the front. That Steve is probably the strongest climber, although Evan could well contest that. I mean, they had a pretty good battle in some of the earlier races I was covering, the OTR series. Even though teammates, you know, they were still sort of like pushing in the events. my race series, the Team 3R race series in particular, they were riding well together, but also riding against each other. That was the Tour of Sicily, if you want to check out the videos, folks. Some really good racecraft and some really good racing. And as I say, Isafor, look, he's pushing hard off the front. Now, if you're listening, Evan, you don't need to chase him if he's dropping out. So, and I don't think he is really. I think he's just Evan's just doing his own pace. Because it's a little bit unfair. If he's dropping out, he can afford to do this. Push off the front. And to be fair to the guy, let's be perfectly fair here. He has stated that he's doing that, so the riders are going to know that he's not, he's not trying to get an advantage here. And my guess is these strong riders will sort of like stay together on this first part of the course. I would have thought maybe even to the middle of the course. I mean, Strojek has already proved what a strong rider he is. I don't know anything about what's his name, Aquila. He's not a rider that I recognise. I know Isafor. I've covered him before, and yes, he's. I mean, if you look, he's pushing out really, really high wattage and not going above threshold, which suggests that he's actually stating in his name that he's an A rider, and I suspect he's quite a very strong A rider. Because if he's pushing out 4 or 5 watt kilos without going up to his threshold, then yeah, he's incredibly strong. 4.8 look there, and he's not at threshold, so that tells you everything you need to know. Okay, we'll check back later on this front group. Let's have a look and see what's happening behind them. Excuse me. Maruri, he's dropped back 90 odd meters and working at about 3.1, 3.2 watt kilos. So yeah, it could come back. Now he rode yesterday. I don't think he rode the full ride yesterday, but he did ride a good part of it. So it's nice to see him supporting the ride and the series. I don't know how many of the others he's probably ridden. Cartmel is at the moment in no man's land. He's 80 odd meters in front of Martinez. So they may join up together, but it's going to be a while before they do. And then Manasseh is really in no man's land. He's 650 meters behind the rider in front and 450 meters in front of the rider behind. So that's no man's land, and it doesn't make any sense for him to either ease up to try and let somebody catch him, or to he's already doing much higher wattage than the rider in front, but it's going to take him a while to close that gap if he does close it. So yeah, it's tough when you're riding on your own. Now these two have been riding together for a little while. They did split up a little bit on the climb, which you would expect, but then they've joined back up together, and you could see the same thing happening on the next climb as well. them splitting slightly and then coming back together once they go over the top. And then Taylor, as I say, was last man on the road, but he's been followed by Bishop. And Bishop, looking at his watt kilos, and I mean, yes, oh, and there we go. You see, I didn't jump back on the bike, so I need to. For that to happen so soon is pretty disappointing. But hey, let's get back on it. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, let's just rejoin. So it'll rejoin me, folks. We haven't lost the feed, don't worry. It's just a bit annoying on my part. I said I had to get on the bike and then I forgot to do so. So we'll let it rebuild, and while it's doing so, I'm just going to crack on with another. Okay, so how are we doing? 85%. So it's rebuilding, and then we'll see where everybody is. Let's switch that off, and then okay. Okay, folks, we're back in. I have to turn the pedals, as I said. So let's hope it works this time. Yeah, there we go. Right there, you can see me moving. Let's find out where the riders are. There we go. So they're on the downhill section after the first climbs. And there's 5 riders, as you can see, together. Now they're the ones that I expected to stay together. But let's find out what's happening behind them. Maruri hasn't really closed the gap, so he's pegging it at the moment, so we'll see what happens there. We've got Cartmel almost a kilometre behind. Again, we'll see what happens there. But these riders are now on the just cresting the climb, so obviously the distances that you can see are really meaningless, because once they get over the top of the climb, they will close up the gaps. As the riders in front hit the next climbs. Okay. They're now coming up to the first of the challenging climbs, shall we say. This kicks up only for a short period, but they're now into the real climbing. The gradients are shown at the bottom of the screen in this profile. Where it's green, it means it's something like below 3.5–4%. Where it starts to turn like an orangey brown means it's between about 4 and 5, and then as it goes over 5 it starts to turn more orange to red, and you can see now that they're on the red section, which is 7%. And when it's bright red, that means it's going to over 10%, or anything between 8 and over 10. So this is sorting out, they've dropped Strojack, who is a strong rider. I suspect he's probably much better on the rolling terrain than what he is on the climbs. And I'm a little bit surprised. Let's just go back to the front. That the 4 riders aren't staying closer together, but I don't think they're worrying at this point. I don't think it's going. Trust me on this. These 2 off the front are not going to stay off the front. This is going to come back together. The terrain lends itself to this happening, to riders sort of like pushing hard on the climbs. And if you remember, Isafor can afford to push hard because he's dropping out. I don't know what Aguilar's doing. Maybe he's dropping out too, or he could just be pushing hard because he wants to get the advantage on the climb. I don't know. But certainly with Isafor, he's going to be dropping out, so he can afford to push off the front like this. And I think Evan and Steve will just ride at their own pace. There's lots of time yet to come back to these 2 off the front. And Strojack even is not out of it. I mean, he's 300 meters behind, but on this rolling kind of terrain, he can easily pull that back. Well, not easily, but he can pull that kind of gap back. So I think the gaps that you're seeing at the moment, yes, they look very impressive, but I think we're going to see it coming back together. And of course, it could be commentator's curse. I could be saying that, and then it could be a case of, yeah, okay, I'm totally wrong. The other thing to remember, folks, as I page down here, is that Evan and Steve are still on the climb, albeit only 3.3%, whereas the others are on the downhill. So these fellows are on the flat or on the downhill part of the slope, so they're going to be pulling out a gap. But as soon as these 2 get over the top of the climb, they're going to be on the downslope and catching. So although the gap looks impressive at 320 meters, it's going to close up as soon as these 2 get over the top, which they're going to do in a few meters' time. And it's nice to see, I mean, you saw the message in there yourself, them saying, don't wait for me, Evan, But, Steve telling Evan not to wait for him. But it's nice to see them riding as a team, because they work much better together as a duo than what they will as individuals at this early stage. Okay, let's find out what's happening behind them. So Strojack is still on the slope, and then Maruri about 80 meters behind. And these two are still staying together. Nice to see. But they've got the steepest part of this climb still to go. Taylor. And finally, last man Bishop. And these two have got a respectable lead here. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Yeah, they're pulling out a few more meters each pedal stroke. Isafor is doing the work off the front and pulling Aguila along. So, yeah, a little bit of I wish I knew whether Aguila is planning on going the full distance. If this was a race situation, it would be called out because you can't have a rider who's not planning on doing the full course pulling another rider along. That just wouldn't be allowed. But it's a sportive, it's a charity event. I think it's really not going to be until we hit the next series of climbs. I mean, there's a spike here, but the next climb here that I'm highlighting with the mouse, it's not until we get to there where we're going to see this gap closing up a little bit. But even that isn't long enough for the climbers to pull back the existing gap at the moment. Where they will have an advantage is once they come over this climb and get down the other side, you can see that a good section of this next bit is uphill, this middle section, as we get to the halfway point. So yes, they're going to have a little bit of an advantage there. But Issafor is really putting in some high wattage here. Let's go back to him. And I'm not impressed with this, I'll be honest. I'm just not impressed with it. We used to run, I'll tell you a little story. We used to run a chain gang out of Wakefield in the UK every Saturday. And it was 100 miles. And it went from Wakefield all the way up into the Dales. And it was a pretty hilly course. And there was a couple of the local riders that turned up week in, week out, every single week in, week out, but never ever did the full distance. They would pull the group along on the front, they'd be up at the front for a good deal of the ride, but they'd only ever ride about 30 to 40 miles. They never ever did the full distance. And they got a bit of a reputation. I mean, nobody minded because, yeah, they were helping. And the whole point of the ride, it was called a chain gang. And the whole point of the ride was to practice the drafting and practice through and off and everything else. So the higher the speed, the better. I mean, we used to click off the 100 miles in under 4 hours, so you can tell the kind of speeds we were doing. And you know, we had some very, very good riders taking part in those rides, elite level riders. So it was good fun. You'd hang on for, well, riders like me, lightweights, would hang on for dear life on the flatter sections, and then you know, we'd try and come into our own and do our bit on the climbing sections. Good fun. But that's a long time ago, folks. I've been riding my bicycle now for more than 50 years, so that gives you an idea. Okay, I think we've watched these two long enough. Let's check out what's happening behind them. They've pulled the gap back, look. So, as I say, this next climb is going to see that gap closing up a little bit. And the following section after this climb lends itself to my two teammates. So expect the gap to come down. And let's find out what's happening behind them. Now, Strojek, let's keep an eye on him because he's 480 meters behind at the moment and not really closing. But this, I could be wrong, but I suspect he's a bigger rider, and the kind of terrain that's going to suit him is later on in the ride, after this next series of climbs. So we'll see what happens. I'm not going to count him out, certainly. And it could be, you know, I often call it, but it could be that riders have simply decided, okay, I'm not going to fight for positions. I'm just happy to do my own pace and ride my own ride. Aguila is actually leaving as well, so he's going in 10 minutes. So Isafor's going as well. So they're chatting with each other, deciding when they're both going to leave, and they're both going to leave in about 10 minutes. So there's no. It'd be nice if Team 3R could catch them before they leave, but they really are pushing out heavy wattage. So we'll see what happens. And these riders further down in the field are just happy to, as I say, ride at their own paces. Manasseh is putting out some good figures, 3 watt kilo, so he's not hanging about, and he's going downhill at that, so he's working really hard. With 3 watt kilos when going downhill, he's pretty hard riding. Martinez is going into the red, so he's working as well. And then Doug and Gomez have been together now for quite some time. And we've got another new rider joined the ride. So we've got Taylor, who obviously has been here since almost the start, but we've got Pomfret, and he joined 4 kilometers ago. So if he finishes the ride, he's doing about 70 kilometers, 69, 70 kilometers. And they're pushing a decent pace as well. Yeah. It's a snazzy team, Kate, that's for sure. Okay, let's and then Bishop is obviously bringing up the rear. On the steeper part of the climb. So there's a good difference between the Lantern Rouge Mr. Bishop here and these fellows up the front. There's about a 6 kilometer gap. So that's a significant distance in terms of coverage. And as we know, these two will probably get over this climb, go down the other side, and then call it a wrap. So it'll be interesting to see whether Steve and Evan decide to ride almost the full ride together. That would make more sense to me, and then duke it out. If they're going to do, they could end up doing the full ride together, or they could simply duke it out on that steep climb towards the end. Because if you get an advantage, we saw yesterday, and I called it correctly. I said, for a rider to stay away, you'd need about 400 meters plus after going over the top of the climb to stay away on that next section. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. A rider called Stair Climber, he had about a 440, 450 meter gap, and the rider chasing him never closed that gap up. Yes, he got it down a few meters and up a few meters, but he never actually closed it. So I think the same thing is going to go for these two. If one of them wants to pull away, he's going to need at least a 400 meter gap over the top of the climb. And you can see they're already pulling the gap back, even though the rides up front are pushing out big heavy watts, but so are these two. So they're putting in a good effort to pull the gap back before they go over the top, because the gap's going to grow significantly. I mean, look, it's 9.9% now, 10.4. So this is a steep little climb. It doesn't last long, but the legs will certainly be feeling it, that's for sure. I mean, 30 kilometers in already with 55 to go. So they've still got a long way to go, but they're going to get some recovery very shortly, because this is a nice downhill section once they get over the top of this climb. Let's check on the front rider. So, and these two look like they've split up. Let's have a look. Let's look back down the hill. I can't even see the next rider on the road. So what's happened to him? Now, has he blown up, or has he simply decided? Yeah, it looks like he's blown up, because he's doing very low wattage. And I think he's coming to an end anyway. So okay. And Strojek is riding well. You can see he's over threshold at the moment. His figures are red, so he's riding well. He's putting in a big effort, and so is Maruri behind him. So he's closing the gap. So if those two come together, and if I was Strojek, I would actually I'd actually want that. I'd want Maruri to join me, and then they can work together on this next section, rather than working as individuals, because this next rolling section, uphill section, lends itself to teamwork as opposed to solo riding. So with a bit of luck, they'll come together. There's 60 meters between them at the moment, but yeah, he's pegging at that, so that it's not like it's growing out any out of hand. Manasia's putting in a really good effort here as well. He's not really closing the gap because he's on the steeper part of the slope, but there's a possibility. And obviously the gap is growing to Cartmel, because he's in the 2s, whereas the rider in front is over 3. So there's a good difference between the watt kilos that they're putting out, which is why he's falling behind. And Martinez is just simply riding at his own pace. Okay, so it looks like, let's go back to the front. It looks like Isafor is calling it an A now. And Aguila looks like he's stopped. Yeah, he has. So Aguila's, there you go, you just saw him disappear from the ride. So he's gone. So we've got, I suspected that he would take advantage of the downhill and stay with the ride during the downhill. But we're interested to see when exactly he does decide to call it a day. And then we're left with these two. And the question of as to whether they're going to ride together or not. I mean, it's nice to see that we've had a few riders late joining. So the figure, I think we had a maximum of 15, and now we're down to 14. We're going to have another one leaving soon, but we've got riders late joining, so we're staying around the 14 rider mark, which is okay. It's not as high as I would have hoped for. But this is the last ride in the series. There's been 6 rides. There was 3 yesterday and 3 today. And it looks like Isafor. Let's just go back to him. No, he hasn't dropped out. Somebody else has dropped out. So let's go down the list and see if we can spot who's dropped out. There's Strojek working really well. Ruben Gomez, Pomfret and Taylor and Bishop. Yeah, I think it was the rider. Was it the rider who was following Strojek that's dropped out? Yeah. This is a force still with us. Strojek's really putting in a big effort. You can see he's over threshold. Let's go to him. Let's have a look and watch him. He's really putting in a big effort here to try and close up. Over a kilometre behind, but this I did say I thought he was a bigger rider, and this next section of terrain is going to suit him if that's true. So, but the lads out front are really pushing up big wattage, and he needs to do the same. He's on a downhill section now, and what he should be doing, I explained why it's so important yesterday, during the feed yesterday, but if a rider's chasing like this and they get to the downhill section, it's minus 2.7% at the moment. But on this downhill section, his numbers should be around the 3 watt-kilo mark if he wants to close the gap significantly. You know, you can't afford to sort of like ease up on the downhill sections if you're trying to chase riders that are pushing out 3 watt-kilos ahead of you. You've really got to keep it going, even on the downhill sections. So, and in fact, can't remember the names, but the rider in second place yesterday freewheeled down the huge downhill section that you see. I'll show you this section here at the end of the ride, the blue section. He freewheeled down, which was fine. He was going fast, but if he'd been wanting to close the gap up more than what he was doing, because the rider in front of him was pushing 3 watt-kilos. And you can't freewheel and match that kind of effort. You just can't. Doesn't matter. You know, if you're going fast freewheeling, and there we go, kicked out again. Too busy talking, so we'll jump back in. Let's jump back in. Wow, that is playing up. Let's switch on my other computer. Okay, and I think we've got to, yeah. So, how am I going to get around this? I'm going to have to delete something, aren't I? Okay, let's go in here and delete something off the I'll come back to that later. So we see we can go for a record and get dropouts every half an hour. Okay, here we go. So once again, I've got to jump on the bike and spin the pedals, and there we go. Oh, that hurts. Okay, so we're back in, and this fellow is still with us. So despite him saying he's going to drop out, he's decided not to do so just yet. I wonder how long he's going to keep it going for. Oh, excuse me. So let's check on what's happening behind him. The two musketeers are still there. And they're pegging the gap. They're not allowing it to go silly. And Strojek is not really closing the gap on them at the moment. This time, yeah. We'll see what happens, but he's not really closing the gap. Now, the one thing that I'd noticed yesterday, and I've just noticed today, is that the paddle here sometimes gets stuck and doesn't actually work. So what we'll do is we'll go into the GUI settings on the app, and we'll turn off the elevation map. And then when we turn it back on, yeah, there we go. It's working now. So what happens is the paddle shows the currently highlighted rider. So as I browse down the field, you can see the paddle going further backwards at the moment for the riders that I'm highlighting. There we go. You can see Doug's just gone over the top of the climb. Pomfret has yet to climb this nasty little climb. And then Taylor's in the valley. Another new rider that's just joined, and it looks like he's putting in a decent effort. Yep, Fonseca. And I've seen Fonseca before, so he's a rider that I've covered in previous events. I recognise the name. And obviously Bishop is last man on the road. So we've had a rider leave, we've had a rider join, so we're at 13 riders at the moment. So we'll work his way forwards again. But you can see there's a huge difference between last rider on the road and the riders up front who are almost at the halfway point. So there you can see Taylor and Pomfret. They may well join up together. And Doug. Martinez. And Sir Strojek. And the gap's growing, so it'll be interesting to see whether he manages to pull it back or not. He's certainly putting in effort. So there's no saying he isn't trying, but he's up against two very strong riders in front of him, and they're working well together, look, which of course they're going to do because they're teammates. And full credit to this lad out the front. He's still putting in heavy wattage. And what we got? We got 46 kilometers remaining, so we're almost at the halfway point. Another 3 kilometers. Oh, excuse me. Now, I don't know when I'm going to return to riding myself. I'm very mindful. I've got an extremely tight chest, and I'm very mindful of not making my condition worse. So I'm certainly not going to plan on doing any riding until my chest is cleared up. And anyway, I couldn't ride at the moment anyway, because I basically get out of breath just coming up the stairs. So, but what I'm going to try and do is continue to cover events as best I can. It's a bit difficult covering events when you're not actually cycling. You would think that it gets easier, but it's not, because I find the cycling actually motivates me. I've just noticed something really strange here. Can you see the wobbling that's going on? Evan behind Noble. Isn't that strange? Look, it gets closer and then he gets a wobble on. That's the first time I've noticed that. I wonder why that's... what causes that? Anyway, by the by. Yeah, so I find it hard to do commentary alone, because I so much want to get back on the bike, and despite the fact that I keep getting kicked out of the events that I am covering because I forget to do so. But that's a different thing. That's a different issue. What I mean by I want to get back on the bikes is I want to ride. I mean, I have to commute. I have to ride outside commuting with the girls. But of course, I've got an e-bike and I turn the motor on almost full. Certainly this last month anyway, because I've just been not well enough to physically pedal without the motor. So when I'm commuting, I can use my e-bike, but obviously indoors, I have to put in some serious effort, and I've just not been well enough to do so. So apologies for all those folks that, in my team in particular, I've been very quiet on the Team 3R front. Not in so much I still organise my the Team 3R group rides every Tuesday and Thursday nights. They're still going ahead, and will continue to do so. It doesn't matter how ill I get. I always spend time putting those on the calendar. But I had planned on running the open section of the Tour of Sicily, but I just couldn't have spent that kind of time here in the cave over the last few weeks with being ill. It's just too much. So I postponed that, and to be fair, I'm going to have to seriously look at the calendar at the end of this month, September, and decide when I am going to put it on. I'll have to look and see what else is on the calendar, because there are a lot of events going off at the moment. I know OTR have got another race series up and coming. They've already got one called King of the Castle or Queen of the Castle at the moment. So finding a slot that doesn't clash with other rides is a bit difficult. And to be honest, I really wanted to do a bit of racing myself to get back into the swing, and this has really kicked me for 6. So, I mean, I would normally have done at least a couple of the Flemish for beginner rides on a Saturday, which James organises, and just not been in any fit state to do so. We're still out the front. And Strojek he's like pegging it. It's been at 1.4 for a good while now. So the gap's not growing, but it's not coming down either. And we've got the next section is going to favour the climbers. Manisseur's looking nice and strong. As opposed to I'm not saying he's not strong, but Cartmouth's just riding his own ride, which is a sensible thing to do when you're stuck in no man's land. No man's land is a space between either groups or other riders. And these two, yeah, riding nicely together. I'm always a little bit surprised when riders decide to ride solo, that they don't either try to join somebody in front or they don't drop back and wait for the person behind. I mean, I can understand it with some riders, like, you know, obviously it wouldn't make any sense for Taylor to wait for the guy behind because he's 3.5 kilometres behind. And he's not going to catch the man in front, Martinez, because he's 4 kilometres in front. So yeah, you can understand Taylor riding on his own. But there are some instances where you see riders and they just shoot off the front and end up in no man's land and end up riding like 20, 30, 40 kilometres on their own. And that, to me, that's just, in a group ride situation, which is what this is, that just doesn't make sense to me. I can understand it if they're pushing for a podium play spot, but if they're just in the middle of the pack, and I mentioned this yesterday, so I won't labour the point, but to me it just doesn't make sense. Now Fonseca, the reason why I've highlighted him again is because his numbers are red again, so he's working pretty damn hard. I mean, he's doing twice the watt kilos of the man in front of him, but he's not going to close that 3.6 kilometres anytime soon, even doing almost double the watt kilo. Work his way back towards the front and see what's happening up there. So the gap's 150 now. So it was 140, it's 150. It's growing, but it's only growing very slowly, and at times he's pegging it back as well. So he's maintaining the gap, I would say. He's not allowing it to get out of hand at the moment. And we'll have to wait and see whether he can pull any of this back. Whereas these two have almost caught. In fact, let's swing the camera around and watch the catch. So there we go. So this is the catch, and then my guess is that your man in front will choose this time. He'll ride with them probably for a little while and then choose this time to drop out. And Steve's giving him a wave as he goes past. Now we know from his figures he's a much stronger rider than these two, so it'll be interesting to see whether he decides to draft them or whether he decides to pull them along. That's another interesting dynamic. In a race situation, this wouldn't be allowed to happen because he wouldn't be allowed to help these two. If they were off the front in a race situation, he wouldn't be he'd be doing what he's doing now, basically staying behind them, because he wouldn't be allowed, once they've caught him, to work with them. But this is not a race, well, it's not an official race, so he can do whatever he wants, to be fair, and nobody's going to call him out, and I'm certainly not, because all credit to the lad for doing what he's done. He's a strong rider, come along, supported the event. And talking about the event, I will just mention that this is a charity event, folks. It's the London to Brighton virtual ride, which has taken place over this weekend. There's been 6 rides, 3 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, in the morning, at lunchtime and in the evening, so as to cover all the time slots for the different riders, in different countries. And the idea being is they've wanted to throw it open so that almost anybody can take part, whichever part of the world you live in, whichever time zone. And I think it's been pretty successful in that respect. Having 3 time slots means people can drop in whenever they want. But it is for charity. It's for the British Heart Foundation. This is a regular recognised ride in real life, the London to Brighton. It's been going donkey's years. I've done it twice, and it's a cracking ride. It's pretty difficult, 85 kilometres with the Ditchling Beacon right at the end there, that steep climb. But it's a cracking event, and this is the first time that it's been put on virtually for charity, for the British Heart Foundation. So if you are listening to this stream and following, nip along to the website and check it out, and drop James, the price of a cup of coffee donation for all the work that he's put in, because this has taken a big effort to put this on this weekend. And I know James has ridden a couple of the rides. So show your support, pop along to the website and drop a bit of a donation, whatever it is, even if it's only the price of a cup of coffee. It all helps. But more importantly, it shows your support for, the community, and particularly organisers like James and myself. We put in an awful lot of work. I certainly put in a lot of work on the Team 3R front. Not so much this last month because of illness, but even given the fact that I've had flu, I've still maintained my group rides and the Team 3R presence on the platform. And I'm very active. I follow the forums, even though I've been pretty quiet recently. I'm very active when it comes to organising and following the races and what's happening. So drop along to the website, give a small donation or a large donation if you can afford it, and show support. So we've gone past the halfway point. Let's drop back down the field and see where the rest of the riders are. And it looks like Taylor has decided to Taylor's a lady. And she's off again, so she might have had a dropout. I've been saying Mr. Taylor, and obviously it's Miss or Mrs. Taylor. So my apologies. It's difficult to tell until you zoom in on riders. It's not clear from the off. It looks like she's got a problem, because you can see her watt kilos are 0 again. So she's obviously having some issues here. And it could be anything. It could be, we call it a virtual puncture. We don't know what's going off, but it's like having a puncture. You can see that watt kilos has dropped to 0, and that's why she pulled over to the side of the road. So obviously struggling to get going. I'm going to stay with her while I jump on the bike and turn the pedals myself. Let's just go back and make sure I check that my wattage is showing on the app. I've turned the pedals and I'm good for another 30 minutes. Yep, so my wattage is showing up. And that will do me for another half an hour. It's 8:25, so I need to get on at 8:55. Sorry, yeah, 8:55. And it does look like Taylor is having serious problems here, which is a shame. We'll come back to her. Let's continue to check on the rest of the field. Have another look and see what's happening at the front. Yeah. So they're on this next hill, but then they've got a fairly lengthy downhill section. So they'll get good recovery. They can afford to push the boat, and they are doing so. Look, 4.2 watt kilos. So they're pushing the boat out here on this climb and can afford to do so because of the recovery they're going to get on this next section. So strong riding from all three riders. And Strojek is pegging it at 150 still. So he's not allowing the gap to get out of hand. He's still within striking distance, although the longer this goes on, the more it's going to be a struggle to pull that kind of gap back. But I'm not going to say he's not going to do it, because I know that he's a strong rider. I really feel for Taylor. If this is a technical issue, and that's what it certainly looks like, the fact that she hasn't disappeared from the ride means that she hasn't pulled out. So it does look like it's a technical issue that's stopping her riding, which is a real shame, especially when you look at the distance that she's already done. And Fonseca is one of the late joiners, but really riding well and strong. In fact, just about to pass Taylor now. Riding strong and riding well. Pike is another late joiner, in fact, just a kilometre ago. So he's joined for the last 50 kilometres of the ride, if he manages to finish it. Which is nice. It's meaning that we're keeping our riders 12 online at the moment. I hate it when all the riders are leaving and you don't get new riders coming on board, because then obviously we end up dropping down to single digits. And so this is another new rider. Again, joined for the latter half of the ride. And Taylor's off again. Oh, well done, lass. So pleased to see that. I mean, it could just have been a nature break. It could have been something as simple as that. But I suspect not. The fact that she stopped, got going again, and then stopped again suggests to me that it was more a technical issue than it was like, a nature break. But you never know. You can only surmise. But I hate to see it when somebody is stuck at the side of the road, because you always think, well, is it a drop? And I've had it happen to me. I've had dropouts where I've been unable to rejoin, and usually I get so annoyed I restart the PC, try everything, can't get back in, and then I just call it a day. So full credit for coming back and getting back on with it. Because Taylor's been with us from the start. It's not like she's a late joiner or anything. Okay, let's move forward and check on what's happening in front. Now, actually, we'll go back to Taylor because we've got these two who are the late joiners. You've got Pike here and you've got Taylor in front. Now, there's a possibility they're going to come together and maybe they can work together for a little while. I don't know. So that would be nice if that can happen. Yeah, and because Strojek is still chasing the leaders, he's dropped a fair way behind them now. They're gone because they're on the downhill. So they've pulled out a significant gap because they're on the downhill section. And you can see that, look at the wattage from Isafor. I mean, it's just crazy. They're really putting in big effort here on the downhill section. Wow. Yeah, and they're pulling out an even bigger gap on Strojek. So I think I can safely say he's not going to close the gap. So it is going to be the two Team 3R riders at the end of this ride, I think. Now, Isifor could well decide, okay, I've said I'm leaving, but he could decide to stay. Yeah, Steve's dropping back slightly. Maybe let's just check on him. Let's turn the camera around and have a look. Oh no, he's staying within reach, so it's just obviously taking a breather. It's closing up now, in fact. Yeah, I would have been surprised actually if he'd let the gap open because he's put in so much work. He certainly doesn't want to be riding on his own. That's not going to happen. But the gap is going out significantly to Strojek, who can't compete with the kind of effort the guys up front are making. I mean, you can see he's putting in big numbers himself, but a small group, even two riders, but three riders in particular, with somebody as strong as Isifor, are going to pull away. They're just going to open up a gap, and it doesn't matter whether you're doing more watt kilos than they are, because of the drafting effect and the fact that they can swap leads. They're going to pull away from you. And it's heartbreaking sometimes when you're in that position, when you're a strong rider, you look at the watt kilos you're putting out. I mean, I've done it on climbs. I've put out almost double the watt kilos of riders in front of me and not being able to close them down for whatever reason. It's not like real life. That's the only criticism of RGT in terms of, in real life, if you're on a climb and riders are in front of you and you're putting out more watt kilos, you're generally closing the gap, but it's not always the case in the virtual world. And that can be for many reasons. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it can be for many reasons. The riders in front can be different weights than you, can be different. I mean, they can be female or whatever. So there can be many different things going on as to why you're not able to close the gap. But when it happens, when you're riding and you're riding out your skin and you're not getting anywhere, it's a bit demoralising. I mean, it's definitely happened to me on the flat where I've been doing more watt kilos than a group in front of me, and they've just pulled away for whatever reason. Um, but that happens in real life as well. So yeah, I used to struggle on the flat in real life, unless I was drafting. If I was drafting, I was okay, but if I got gapped, I really used to struggle because yeah, I was a strong rider, but I was just so lightweight. I didn't have the kind of power that the bigger riders had. So, tell you what I'm going to do. Let's just go. Let's go page up. So we've got the last rider on the road has got 46 kilometers to ride. Now let's go to the first rider. So there's 15 kilometers difference, which is huge. 15 kilometers between the front and the back. Now, what happened yesterday, folks, was I covered like the podium places. I covered the first four coming into the finish, and then I closed down the broadcast because I'd been sat here for 2 hours and 40 minutes, which I figured was, well, more because I'm online before the ride starts. So in almost 3 hours of coverage, and I decided to call it a day. And to be fair, I will probably do the same today. I'm certainly not able to wait for the riders at the back coming in, or even those in the middle. I'm gonna call it. So my apologies in advance for not covering every rider over the line. Usually when I'm covering events, I try to do that. But because this is a charity event and because it's numerous rides over the weekend, like this is, there's been 6 rides and riders are dropping in and out as well. I'm not going to stay until the end of each ride. If it was a race, then there's a very good chance I would have done so, because in a race, you're not getting late joiners. You're getting all the riders are doing all the distance. So I generally stay with the broadcast the whole way. But on these kind of events, it just doesn't seem fair for me to hang around an extra hour or more for the last rider to come in. Now, if Isifor does decide to stay the course, then I suspect he's not going to try and jump away from these two. That the 3 of them are going to ride right up until that final climb, because the terrain lends itself to that, to riding as a group. There may be some toing and froing, certainly on this next blue section coming up. I think we'll see gaps appearing, but I think they'll be closed up again, because the valley section before the climb certainly lends itself perfectly to group riding, even though we're only a small group of 3. But you can also see, you've got this front group of 3. You've got Strojek chasing behind. He's pegging. To be fair to the lad, he's pegging it, and the gap isn't growing fantastically, but it is growing. And these riders are riding their own, their own rides. They're not thinking about where they're going to finish in the ride. I don't think. That's my take on it, anyway. And when you're like Cartmel in no man's land, he's 3 kilometres behind the rider in front, he's a kilometre and a half in front of Martinez, following him up. Then I think he's just riding his own ride. Pike's a late joiner, putting in a strong effort. He was strong when I joined him. He's still doing 3 watt kilos and above. So he's riding strong, and that's the thing. He's probably, he's joined for the latter half of the ride and decided he's going to push it for the last 50 kilometres. And full credit to the man. I've nothing but respect for somebody that wants to do that. Really happy to see Taylor still going strong. And hope she gets to finish. Now Heist joined at the 52 kilometre to go mark, so another one that's maybe looking at just finishing off the second half of the ride. You never know, because some riders will just drop in for, for the odd section, like 10 miles, 20 miles or whatever. And other riders, they want to do the full event. The nice thing about sportives is you can do that. You can choose just exactly what you want to do. You can choose whatever pace you want to do. But there still is going to be kudos for being first over the line. I don't care what anybody says. If this goes down to the wire towards the end, they're going to be racing. They're going to be racing each other. Certainly, if Isafor is still with them towards the end, then I know my teammates are going to try and work him over. That's a given. That goes without saying. The question is, he looks like a really, really strong rider, and I suspect they're going to struggle to get the better of him if he does decide to stay with them. I hope he does. I hope he does make. I think it's a bit off that he said he was leaving and he's decided, no, I'm not going to leave after all, because that gives the other riders a false sense. But I hope now that he's still here that he does decide to finish the race, because it will make it a little bit more exciting. You know that Evan and Steve are just going to ride together at least up until the climb, and even then possibly even decide to battle it out on the final section, final last kilometre, because they've nothing to prove against each other. But I think if Isafor is with them, then they're going to completely change the tactics. I know them well enough to realise that. So yes, if he does stay, it's going to make it more exciting. But look at what kilos they're putting out. Look at the effort they're putting out. I mean, this is tough riding, folks. They're really working hard on this climb. It's only a short one, so they'll be over the top in no time, but they're working hard. Oh, excuse me. I'm tired. That's the problem with not feeling well and having 2 small girls running around. It's hard work. Okay, let's check on the rest of the field. So he's pulled it back. It was over 3 and now it's under. So he's pulled some of the advantage back. And we'll continue to check on him and see whether he manages to peg it even more. Manisi is working pretty well as well. If he can join Strojek, I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but if he could join him and they work together, who knows? And he is bringing the gap down to Strojek, so yeah, we'll check back on that a bit later. 8:55 I have to jump on the bike, or a little bit before, so we're coming up to that time almost now. I'll make sure I don't get kicked again. Bike is still pushing out a really good pace. Now this is interesting. You can see that, I mean, yeah, you can understand them not wearing a heart rate monitor, but there's no cadence showing either. So perhaps there was some kind of an issue earlier. Because it's unusual for cadence not to show up. You can see from all the other riders the cadence is showing. So I don't know what's going on with Taylor, but the fact that the cadence isn't showing up means that there's some kind of an issue with the system. And just as I say that, you can see that Pike's cadence isn't showing either. So, but a high heart rate, which shows you how hard Pike is working. I don't know what the max is, but 170 means that you're putting in a reasonable amount of effort. Doesn't matter what your max is. Whereas Cartmel, you can see he's just spinning the pedals. Nice low heart rate. No heart rate monitor from Stojek, but you can see them going red here. So, although that might be braking actually, yes, it probably is. So that's because he's drafting and he's too. Evan isn't wearing a heart rate monitor. Steve is, but he's not really. What surprises me here is that Steve has got a C after his name. I don't know what that means, but he's not a C rider. Surely. I mean, I think he's way too strong to be a C rider, so I don't know what the C means. I'll have to ask him. But all three of them are over threshold, look. So yeah, they're working hard on this section. But of the three of them, you can clearly see that Isafor is by far his watt kilos, threshold watt kilos, is much higher than the other two. You know, I think his threshold was something like 4.9, 5.0 before he turns red, which is pretty high. I mean, that's definitely A class, A plus class even. Whereas you saw Evan, we saw 4.0 there. So is Evan's threshold 4.0 or is it even lower? I don't know. I mean, that doesn't tell the full story, but it does give you a good guide as to how hard the rider is having to work, you know. Yeah, Isafo is saying he's going in 10 minutes, but he said that an hour ago, so take it with a pinch of salt. Which is not a criticism, folks. I'm not criticising the lad. I'm pleased that he's stuck around this long, and like I said, I wish he'd stay around now for the rest of it, because it could possibly turn into a fair old ding-dong battle. But let's just swing the camera around and see what's happening on the road. Yeah, there you go. So they're keeping him in sight, but he is a much stronger rider. And my feeling is that, you know, if he decided he wanted to take off and leave them, he probably could do so. They'd have something to say about it, but I genuinely think he could leave them. And the fact that he's not finishing the ride. So interesting interesting situation up the front there. Half a kilometre difference between them. Sorry, 2.5 kilometres. I don't think Manisir is going to catch up with Stojek. He's putting in a really good effort, but it does look like every time he starts to close up the gap, it looks like Stojek is opening it up again, or at least keep pegging it and keeping it the same. I mean, it's coming down now, but very slowly. So it's possible they could join up together, but I don't know. At this point in the ride, maybe not. Now, for those that are new to the stream, watching maybe for the first time, or for anybody that hasn't followed me regularly, what we're watching here is a virtual representation of a real-life ride, the real-life ride being the London to Brighton charity ride that takes place every year. And it's about 50 miles, 85 kilometres, just a little bit over 50 miles. And it's a really nice event in real life. And what they've done is RGT have digitised it, or James and his crew have digitised the real life course. So the ups and downs are true to life. What is completely different, and they can't get true to life, obviously, because they have to use an existing graphics pack. What's called a skin in RGT. RGT can't, as of yet, and possibly not for some time, replicate real life scenery on the fly. They certainly have real life courses that mimic exactly the scenery of real life rides, like the Stelvio, for example, Cap di Fomenta, and Von 2, to name just a few. So they do have real life courses that mimic real life rides, but in this instance what's happening is the profile is real life, so the ups and downs, this is an exact representation of the real life up and downs. What's different is the scenery that you see in both sides and the tarmac. This isn't real life. This is a graphics package which is part of what's known as the Magic Road pack, which comes with RGT. So RGT will draw the scenery, but it will all be very similar kind of based. This is, I think, the European pack. There's another Belgium pack where you get more cobbles. But yeah, this is a basic graphics package which is thrown on top of the profile. And it basically shows all the correct bends and everything else, but it doesn't show the scenery as the scenery would appear in real life. I mean, in real life, the ride doesn't have any of this kind of roadside trees and everything else. It's completely, oh, and I've been thrown out. I forgot to get back on. Okay, I'll join again, folks. Just bear with me. Okay, there we go. So it's going to rebuild the scenery. And that's a classic example of what happens when I get into the commentary and I forget about the jumping on the bikes section, because I said I had to do it 10 minutes ago, and then I get busy chatting away and completely forget to do so. So, yeah, my bad. Again. I'll try not to do it as we approach the finish of the ride, but I'm not going to promise anything because I'm getting tired. What I find a little bit difficult when numbers start dropping in the rides, and you've only got a few riders virtually on the road, commentary becomes a little bit more difficult in terms of, finding something to talk about. So I end up waffling on, and I don't know, maybe a lot of you get bored with my musings and everything else. So I end up making up a few stories, well, not making up, but telling a few stories, or I end up going off on a tangent. But that's because I'm trying to fill the space. I mean, there's nothing worse than, I think, watching a stream and there being no sound or no chatting away or no commentary. I find those kind of feeds very, very boring because just watching riders riding on a virtual road without knowing what's going on, without any kind of commentary, soon gets tiresome. And maybe even it gets tiresome listening to me. You'll have to let me know on that one. But and the reason why a moment ago you saw two of me, folks, was because I've got two cameras in my pain cave. One for me riding on the bike and one for me sitting in my chair and doing commentary. And I forgot to turn off the webcam, the one on the bike. So I'll do that now while we're watching these three folks tackling this hill. So where are we? Let's go into the thing and turn off the webcam. Yep, there we go. So it's now off. Hey. So a little bit of a gap here, but nothing that's going, they're not trying to distance each other. They're going to join back up together. Unless, of course, if let me just see if I can, come on, why is not allowing me to, there we go. Let's get back onto the ride, the view. If this was a situation with our friend here deciding to finish the ride with the two Team 3R riders, then this is what they would be doing. One of them would be jumping off the front and seeing whether he would chase or not. And then when they caught up with him, In fact, Evan would be sat behind him. So you'd have Steve going off the front, Evan would sit behind him and follow his wheel. And when they caught, then he would take off, and that's what we call working over. They would work together to try and break him, try and break his legs, virtually, of course. But obviously that's not going to happen here because they've seen, as I have seen, Isafor say that he's leaving the ride. My suspicion is that if he is going to leave, he'll leave before we start the climb, because the two team three are, oh, Evan's got to go. Well, that's a shame. But thanks for coming along, Evan. Really good riding, sir. Well done. So now there's no doubt about who's going to take the, which is a little bit sad for me, because I'm sat here thinking, okay, there's going to be a little bit of competition towards the end. Let's just go back to these lads here. So Evan's left us. We're down to 9 riders now. Isafor is going to leave, I suspect, before the climb, which just leaves Steve. And there's no way that Strojek is going to catch Steve unless he completely eases up and decides to let him catch. So we know who the first rider over the line is going to be. So then I suppose it's a battle between Strojek and Manasseh for the podium spots. Because Isafor is going to leave us. Or at least that's what he says. I mean, but he has. And here we go, Ditchling. So that's why they call this Ditchling Beacon, sir and ladies. The big climb is called Ditchling Beacon, and it's a noticeable landmark just outside Brighton. And then after you go over Ditchling Beacon, you can actually see the seaside. You drop down this huge downhill to the seaside. It's a beautiful ride. I used to live, incidentally, back in 2012, I used to live in the southeast. Is it the southeast? Sussex? Yeah. Not far from Brighton. Brighton was just a bike ride away, a short bike ride away. Well, not a short. Was it about 30 miles? So yeah, easily doable. So Steve is not even bothering to chase here. He's just letting him go. There's no point if the guy's, dipping out. So let's just check on what's happening behind then. Now keep an eye on the distance behind. Is 3.2. So let's 3.28. So let's see what happens to that as we get on the climb, whether Strojek is able to hold that or whether it grows. I suspect it will grow unless Steve Noble decides to back off. This is going to be the interesting one because Manasseh is definitely closing the gap on Strojek in front of him, and he's looking strong as well. He's looking stronger than Strojek. So I suspect that we could have a swapping of places here. And the 1, 2, 3 is not yet determined. 1 is certainly determined, but 2 and 3 I think is a battle between these two, and I suspect it's going to swap around. Martinez is just doing his own ride, and absolutely nothing wrong with that, but He's going to finish 4th if he manages to finish the full ride. Pike is in no man's land at the moment. Almost 6 kilometres behind, so despite the fact that he was working really well earlier, he's eased off a little bit, and I suspect he's just going for the finish here. We've already spoken about Taylor, and she's doing an amazing ride given the problems she had earlier, which we don't know whether they were problems. I'm just surmising they were. Oh, we've had another new joiner. So joined 2.5 kilometres ago. What's the name? Aurozani. Don't know what the flag is though. I don't recognise that flag at all. And catching Taylor, but doing significantly more watts. So he's not going to. Is it a he? Suspect it is. Yep. So I think Aurozani is going to just fly on past Taylor. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name. Zia? Whatever. Somebody else with a C after the name, and I really don't know what it means, whether it means C category rider or not, because Steve Noble's got a C after his name and he's definitely not a C rider. So okay, let's go back to the front, and he's sitting up now, so I suspect this is it. Yeah. And there goes Steve. So Steve has gone past, and it doesn't look like, yeah, Isavor's wattage is dropping, so he's now decided to call it a day. I'm just going to turn on and off the GUI again, because I suspect it stopped working. So just bear with me a minute, folks, while we turn it off and turn it back on. Yeah, I was right. It stopped working. And I was also right when I said that I genuinely thought that Isafor would jack in just before the climb, and that's been the case. Which is interesting, because I know he knows that Evan and Steve were the true climbers, so perhaps he didn't want to take them on the steepest climb. I mean, you can see the sign there says 8%, but trust me, it gets a lot higher than 8%, which is really cruel. I mean, he's ridden 72 kilometres, and the final climb is in double figures. So this is going to bite. So who's behind? Obviously, and they have joined together though. So now Strojek will do well to stay with Manasseh because he's doing more watt kilos. So he should, well, he's doing the right thing. He should draft, which is exactly what he's doing. Get some recovery and try and stay with him as long as he can. A difficult task and a difficult ask, but he certainly doesn't want to be, yeah, he doesn't want to be pulling in front. By all means half wheel, but he shouldn't be pulling in front. Manasseh has already proved that he's the stronger rider, so let him do a bit of work for a little while before you decide to try take over and do some work on the front. I mean, this is going to be an interesting thing, but I don't think it's really going to be a contest. Looking at the way that Manasseh is riding, I think he's far stronger than Strojek is at this moment in time. I mean, Strojek is getting on his wheel. That's where he needs to stay. He certainly doesn't want to be But you see, he's losing the wheel almost immediately. So that tells me that he's not happy at this pace, this extra pace. And he's not. That's clear. Look, he's having to go above threshold just to get back on the wheel where he can hold it, but not for more than a few seconds. And then he's back into threshold. So this is hurting him. I'm going to stay with this because this is a good example of what not to do. He's really, really struggling here to try and hold the wheel. Look, he's into threshold again, trying to close up the gap. Let's just zoom out slightly. Sorry, I zoomed in. Zoom out. And this is what we call burning matches. So each time he has to try and close up this gap that opens up, we call it burning a match. And you've only got so many matches in your box. So eventually he'll completely blow if he continues. And I don't understand that at all. I just do not understand him going off the front like that, because immediately Manisir puts in a bit of an effort and he's off the wheel again. And again, look, he's closing up the gap, and then Manisir just puts in a little bit more effort, just a little bit, tiny little bit more, 3.3, and the gap opens, so Strojek has to go into threshold to close the gap, closes the gap, and watch what Manisir does again. He's on 3 at the moment. My guess is he'll just up it slightly. No, he's maintaining it. He's maintaining steady. He's being kind. 3.1. But this is fascinating. Now, Strojek will probably stay with him as we get to this section here, this downhill section. Because if I'm right in my characterization, I believe Strojek is the bigger rider, which means that he's going to be more comfortable on the downhill sections and on the flatter sections, but on the uphill, slightly uphill sections, which we was watching a few minutes ago, he's at a disadvantage. Look, he's actually at an advantage here because he's the heavier rider. I'm dead certain I'm calling this correctly, because what we're seeing on screen is bearing out what I'm saying. But as soon as it starts to go, which it's doing now, it starts to go uphill again, you can see that Manisir, because he's a lighter rider, has the advantage. Not much at the moment because it's only 1%, but as the slope increases, you're going to see Manisir staying below threshold, and you're going to see Strojek going above threshold to try and stay with him. And he's not going to be able to do so. I can state categorically that he's going to get dropped like a stone once we hit this climb. Look, he went into the red there. As soon as it starts to climb, he's going to have to go into the red just to hold Manisir's wheel, and he's not going to be able to do so. Let's just have a quick look at what's happening with Steve. Look, he's on the 9.1% section, so he's getting... In fact, we'll stay with Steve and just watch him tackle this 12% plus section, which is coming up now. And he's already climbed above 10%. The climb that he's already done has gone above 10, but it goes above 12. It eases off slightly and then it kicks up again. I think, am I right in saying it's not far now? He goes round a bend here and then he goes round a left-hand bend, which is where it kicks up, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, you can see there you go, the gradient is switching now. It's getting steeper, 10.4, 11.1, and it really starts to hurt you. It really starts to kick up. I mean, you can see virtually the gradient changing, gets even steeper, look, 11.7, and now is the 12% part, and I think it goes up to about 12.4. Yeah. So this will be really, really hurting. And Steve is not backing off it. He's putting out high wattage, almost at the top. And once he gets to the top, he will absolutely fly. There's no way that the guys behind him stand a chance of catching him once he gets to the top, because he's going to be on the downhill while they've still got more than a kilometre to climb. So he's going to pull out such a huge advantage once he goes over the top. Which he's about to do now. The gradient is going to ease back now. It's going to drop under 10 and then slowly start to come down. I mean, this is the very top of the climb where it eases slightly under 10. But it does seem never ending. I remember this from real life, and you just think, when is it going to end? So you go around this bend and then you can see the top. There we go. So the gradients ease. So I mean, this is the battle that I thought would happen, and you can see that Manisir has pulled out a fairly significant. We can't even see Strojek in the picture yet, so he's obviously way back there behind that bend. Let's check on him. There he is. So you can just see on the road now. He's within sight, but he's not going to catch. Even with this big downhill, Manisir is going to have, I reckon, if he gets to the top of the climb with a decent advantage, that will grow. That will grow significantly. Because Strojek will still be on the climb. It's 100 metres at the moment, but trust me, that will go out to at least half a kilometre by the time he gets to the top. Let's just check on. And Steve's already, and look, he's still putting out good wattage on the downhill, so he's not taking anything for granted. He's still working hard. I explained that yesterday in yesterday's broadcast, why you need to do that, to make sure that the gains you've made are not brought back by another rider following on behind. And Manisir hasn't reached the steepest part of the climb yet, so check on the man behind him. Yeah, you can see that, I mean, the poor lad's working really, really hard. But he's no match for the lighter rider in front of him. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how does Derek know that Strojek is the heavier rider and Manisir is the lighter rider? what you do is you look at the virtual performance and the figures being put out by both riders, and it's not difficult to calculate and work out. And especially when you're watching riders over different types of terrain, we watched Strojek pull in front of Manisir on the downhill section, quite significantly, quite easily, and that just reinforces my belief that he's a good bit heavier than Manisir, a bigger rider, and then the ease with which Manisir was able to sort of like pull in front of Strojek on the slightly uphill, and then when it got to the steeper section by easily pull away. That just confirms my belief, that one of them's what we call a roller and another one's the pure climber. So let's check on the field further behind, because this is really. I mean, we'll come back to Manisir to watch him pull ahead as he gets to the top of the climb, but the rest of the riders are a good way off. I mean, this is Martinez, and he's still got a couple of kilometres before he even gets to the climb. So there's a good distance between the riders at this part of the ride, and that's one of the reasons, folks, why I'm not going to be covering every rider coming into the finish, and I apologise for that in advance. But I mean, these are and also the majority of the riders that I'd be waiting for are late joiners, so it's not like they've ridden the full ride. Steve's got 7 kilometres to go, so he's going to finish in around about the same time as the riders yesterday. I think we had something like 2:38 was the finishing time yesterday, so he's not going to be far off that today, I think, give or take. It'll be interesting to compare, actually, and I'll do that when I end the broadcast. Compare the time to yesterday. Really pleased that it's one of my teammates. I can't say taking the win, although it is almost like a race to these guys. And to be honest, anybody that rides 2.5 hours plus on a virtual bike ride has earned my respect, certainly. Because the majority of riders that ride indoors on a trainer, for the majority of riders, an hour is about as much as they want to do. When you get to the 2 hour mark, you're basically getting into the realms of being hardcore, and anything like over 2.5 hours, and you're definitely a hardcore indoor cyclist, because it's hard work. It's hard work. So here he is on the downhill section, and remember what I said about the gap would grow. I mean, look at the gap now between the two riders, 5 kilometers. So because Manisir still had the the climb to complete, Steve was always going to open up a huge gap on him. But the interesting thing now is if we go back to Strojek, who is still on the climb, and the gap, the gap between them was like only a few hundred meters. By the time Strojek gets to the top, the gap is going to be something like 2 kilometers. So he's not going to be able to, he's not going to be able to close the gap on Manisir at all, significantly on the long downhill section, because he's going to be too far behind. Even if Manisir was to ease up, which he's not going to do, he wouldn't significantly close the gap. As I say, I expect it to be, by the time he gets over the proper top of the climb, I expect it to be about 2 kilometers, the difference between them, which is huge. That's a huge gap, and shows the difference between one rider being, being a non-climber and the other rider being a climber. This is why we have a rider in my team, Team 3R, Tim Cook. And this is why he's such an amazing rider, because he's a bigger rider. He's not huge, but he's a bigger rider, but yet he's able to compete with the climbers. He doesn't lose that much to them on even the steeper climbs, because he's such a strong rider. He sort of like pegs the gap to within a reasonable distance, and then he puts in a huge effort on the downhill, but he doesn't allow the gap to get out of hand on the uphill section, and he's able to sort of like peg riders going off the front back in anything but really proper hilly or mountain stages. On a true hilly, a hard hilly stage, he can sort of like be there and thereabouts, the podium. On a mountain stage, he'd be struggling to get a podium place. If this a good, a large bunch of climbers, if there's only a few, then yes, he's there for his podium spot. But if it's a rolling stage like this, you can fully expect him to be there at the end, which is sugar. Wow, how did that happen? It's not time yet. Okay, we'll get back in. Don't worry, folks. We will catch the end. I'll be back in time to watch my comrade Steve go over the line. Although I suspect he won't have that much distance left to do. So come on, build the magic road and let's get back in. And now those that watch the streams regular are probably saying to myself, how do you let this happen time and time again, Derek? That's just, I can't be asked. Oh dear. Yeah, it's pretty poor. It's not easy when you've got to constantly jump on the bike. It's definitely not easy. And sometimes you set the alarms and you think, yeah, okay, I'm good to go. And even then, I get caught out. So, yeah. And I'm absolutely shattered. I'm tired. I need to have something to eat. I only had a brief bit of something to eat before we came up here to cover this event. Had to leave the children and family downstairs. So I'm looking forward to having something to eat when we're finished here. which won't be long now, another 15 minutes at the most. And here we go. So the magic road is built. I have to jump back on the bike. Here we go. There we go. Turn the pedals. So, and then let's rejoin Steve with 2.1 kilometers to go. So I'm glad we didn't miss the final section. Now he's got a almost 5 kilometer lead, so he doesn't have to push, but he's still pushing, which is typical of the man. I know him so well. Yeah, still pushing out 3 watt kilos, look, and he's absolutely no need to do so. Incredible. The gap between Manisir and Strojek is about 1.7 now, 1.7 kilometers. So I said it would probably go up to about 2. I wasn't far off. And it may well swap around now, but it doesn't matter because there's not going to be any change in positions there. I correctly called that Manisir would catch Strojek and go straight past him. I saw that from the figures that they were both doing, so that wasn't a difficult call to make. I'm really, really pleased to see that Taylor is still, 20 kilometers behind Steve. So she's going to finish, a good 40 minutes after we end the broadcast. But I'm really pleased that she's going to finish the event. So here's the red kite, the banner. 1 kilometer to go. With Steve going under it, and we'll follow him all the way to the finish, and then we'll follow in the podium places, I think, and then call it a wrap. Because there's a long way behind. Even Manisir is a long way behind Steve, but Martinez is 12 kilometers behind, and I don't really feel like sitting here for that length of time following in riders who are not riding the full distance. I feel a little bit sorry for Taylor, who is riding the full distance, but that's a long wait for her to finish the ride. So you'll have to forgive me. Now this is a nice finishing section, and where my mouse is pointing here up the road, you can actually see this finishing banner from 600 meters away. So had either yesterday or today come down to a sprint finish, it would have been perfect, because although it's slightly uphill, you can see the banner from 600 meters away, which makes for a good sprinter's stage. And here we go, 200 meters to the line. Well done, Steve. Cracking ride, mate. And Team 3R take the honours. Shame there weren't more riders around you, sir, to make it a bit of a battle, but well done. Really, really pleased with that. So Manisir's 4 kilometers behind, a little bit more. But because the majority of it's downhill, finishing time was 2:33. So 2:33, 2:34. I think faster than yesterday. So I think if Steve had been riding yesterday, he would have he would have finished before the riders finished yesterday. I think we were 2:38 yesterday. I need to check, but I think I'm about right there. Yeah, it was, Steve, very hard, that last climb. I agree with you. I mean, to be fair to Strojek, look, he's actually pulling back. I mean, the gap was 1.7 kilometers. He's got it down to 1.1. So he's actually pulled back some of the lead that Manisir had, but that's to be expected. He's the heavier rider. We're going downhill, and even though he doesn't have to put in the same amount of wattage, I mean, Manisir's really working hard here, putting in 3.5 watt kilos, whereas Strojek's doing 2.5. So he's still staying with him because of his additional weight. But he's not going to close up the gap significantly in time. 3.2 kilometers to go. It's just not going to happen. In fact, let's check on him. Oh, that's Martinez. That's not who we want to watch. We want to watch Strojek. Yeah. So you can see the gap is, and look at the difference in watt kilos, 1.5 to 3.4. So a huge difference in effort being put in, but the gap is just stable. The gap is 115, and it's been at that for quite a while now. So he's not able to close the gap despite the fact that he's being battered with a much higher watt kilo. So I'm gonna follow 1, 2, and 3 in, and then we're gonna end the broadcast, folks. I've really enjoyed having you here. If you haven't already, hit the like button on the video. And if you're not a subscriber, first of all, why not? Yes, I've been a little bit quiet lately, but I do put out a lot of videos when I'm active and fully fit. So there's some good content on there where I discuss team tactics, race tactics, discuss different riders, and I'm quite forthright in my views at times, so I don't hold back in calling out the cheaters. So some good fun to be had from the videos, and you can learn a lot if you're new to virtual cycling, certainly, because I have a pretty good handle on it by this point. Been doing it a long time. Was one of the early adopters of over on Swift, so a lot of experience in the virtual cycling world, as well as in the real cycling world. I've been cycling for more than 50 years, so I think I've learnt something in that time. Let's go back to Manisir because he's getting close to the red banner, so we're just going to switch the view around so that we can watch him coming into the banner. Yeah, and he's pegged the gap. I mean, the gap was 115, it's 120 now, so he's managed this quite nicely. Yes, he's putting in some high wattage, but I think he had to do so, to be fair to him. Strojek, always was going to have the advantage on the downhill section, and to be fair to this lad, he's managed it really, really well as he goes under the 1 kilometre to go banner. We call this a red kite for obvious reasons. So 1 kilometre to go. It's nice to see them putting in a 1K banner, even though this is not a race. This is a sportive or a charity ride, but it is nice to get that put into the graphics package. I think it's a very nice touch, along with the names on the road. Of course, you can probably notice them. They put the riders' names on the road as well, which is a really, really nice touch. Okay, so round the final bend, and then as he turns this bend here, just up ahead, so from about this, well, slightly less than 600 meters, let's have a check here. So 558 meters, you can see the finish. So here he goes. For a good second place on the day. And although it's not a race, he'll be very, very pleased with that. Stragic brings down the lead to just over a kilometre, but he was never going to close it. I mean, this lad wouldn't have let him close it anyway. But really good effort to get it back down again. I mean, really strong riding from both riders. Can't fault them. So here we go into the banner. Well done, sir. And there we've got Strojek just going almost exactly a kilometre behind. So he's done well to pull that back. And look at his watt kilos. He's really putting in a big effort here. Well done, sir. I have to say I'm full of admiration for the ride you've put in here. It must have been a little bit heartbreaking when the rider did catch him and go past. And when a lighter rider does that and comes past you, you know in your heart that you're not going to, especially with a big climb coming up, you know in your heart that you're not going to be able to compete with him. You just know. You know, he's probably been watching him coming up behind him, watching his figures himself, and realising that, oops, he's putting out much more watt kilos, must be a lighter rider, he's going to leave me on the climb. And it's pretty demoralising sometimes. I could be reading it wrong, but I don't think I am. So well done. Third place, Mr. Strojek. That'll do nicely. And we'll do a quick check on the other riders. And then call it a wrap for the evening. Last 100 meters. Well done, sir. Well done indeed. Great riding. Martin is looking good. Riding well. Another rider that's done the full distance. 10 kilometers to go. So about another 15, 16 minutes. Miss or Mrs. Taylor. Fantastic ride from this lady. Really wish I could stay with you. Hike is on the really steep climb. Okay, folks, so I'm going to call it a day there. Let's thanks very much for watching, everybody. As I say, please hit that like button, and if you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one. Just a quick shout out, on Tuesday we have the Team 3R group ride. That kicks off at 8 o'clock Central European time, 8 PM in the evening. That's 7 o'clock UK time. And then the group ride on Thursday is generally a little bit longer. That goes off at the same time, 8 o'clock CET, 7 o'clock UK time. And that's every week. That's every Tuesday and every Thursday for the Team 3R group ride. And on that note, I'm going to say good night. And thanks for watching. Stay safe, everybody.